We are creatures of desire. What we most desire is meaning. What makes us suffer most is a lack of meaning.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Marital therapist, author, and communications trainer Andrew G. Marshall invites guests from all walks of life to discuss what makes life meaningful.
Hello, I'm Andrew G. Marshall. Welcome to The Meaningful Life. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, and wherever you find your podcasts. We grow up with a lot of traditional beliefs about relationships. They come from TV, society in general, and from religion. Even if we're not religious per se, we still swim in the heritage of 2 millennium of settled religious thought. And when it comes to sexuality and gender in particular, the messages get stronger and they get more black and white. Now, we seem to have made some progress. Gay and lesbian people have more rights and acceptance than before, and we often see their stories in popular culture. But what if you find both men and women attractive, or you find the whole topic of gender complicated and often unhelpful? It can seem that you're out on a limb with little understanding and sometimes a lot of shame heaped on you too. My witness today is DIANE HASSALL, who is a psychosexual and relationship psychotherapist, clinical supervisor, intimacy coach, and she's kindly offered the following explanation of her work. It is grounded in gender, sex, erotic and relationship diversity and diversity per se. It's not about me and another, them and us. We're all unique and deserve and have the right to love and be loved with whom we choose and experience consensual pleasure our way. So, DIANE, why is it important to have this mission statement for you?
I grew up in East London in the UK. My teenage years were in the 1980s, and it was a very divided place, a very bigoted place, not just in terms of sexuality, but race too. And class. And that just didn't sit well with me at all. I couldn't comprehend it because my friends were my friends as I grew up. The people that I was attracted to, the people I wanted to have sex with, were diverse. They weren't like me. But the messages I got that I could only be in relationship with, I could only have sex with, or even be friends with people like me. And I didn't become a therapist until my mid-40s. So I grew up, I kind of had 30 years in between, going through that kind of personal battle to be authentic, to be who I was and to love who I wanted to love and how I wanted to love. And that was really the motivation for me to become sex and relationship therapist, would be to hold space for that exploration for other people, to kind of validate their feelings, their experiences, to try and remove some of that shame. And as you said, a lot of it, whether we're religious or not, is rooted in, deeply religious and deeply colonial messaging about what's right and what's wrong.
So what messages in particular, let's sort of get gritty and down to a sort of practical level, what sort of messages did you get from where did you get them that were ones that you've spent a long time trying to root out of your brain? Or your body as well.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose I'll go out from my immediate family to start with. And I think it was, the media at the time. It was the media at the time. So, Jackie magazine, Girly magazine, Teen Girl magazine. And it was how I was supposed to look, how I was supposed to look to be attractive to men as a woman, to be attractive to men.
And how was that?
Girly. I had to be feminine. I had to be subdued. I had to be compliant. I had to be a good girl. So that was the kind of wider messaging. And then I had, my education around sex. And sex was, it was focused very much on the mechanics and what you shouldn't do. It was all around, this is what you do to prevent a pregnancy. This is what you do to prevent sexually transmitted infection. There was nothing about pleasure at all. It was just about the mechanics and what not to do. And the messages that I got, particularly from my mother, not my father, who I discovered after his death was decidedly kinky. I didn't know that growing up. But my mum was very puritanical. It was, this is what you do. Don't have sex before marriage because, nobody will want you then. My mother died 2 years ago, not knowing anything about my sexuality. So it was from the world out to the world in, to the messages that I got from my mum, and then the kind of shame that was inherent in that I was somehow wrong.
So what did you want to do, or what did you think about doing that was wrong then, as far as Jackie and your mother was concerned?
I didn't always want. I think about my own kind of gender expression. I didn't always want to be girly. I didn't always want to wear pretty dresses and do my hair and wear makeup. I wanted, to throw on my dungarees and my kickers and, get dirty and climb trees. But that wasn't seen as being the thing to do as a young woman.
It's sort of acceptable up to sort of puberty to be a girl like that, but then suddenly they take away the right to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I grew up in the era of glamour modelling. This is how women should look to be attractive.
I think we need to say for people who are not English that glamour modelling means showing your breasts. Am I right with that?
Yeah, showing your breasts. Yeah. I grew up in the world where, in my community in the East End, it was almost like, a recognition of status if you were a glamour model.
And in fact, in the same era, because I'm probably 20 years older than you.
No, I don't think so.
Well, I grew up in the 60s, so and if you're in the 80s, I think that's probably making us 20 years different. I was born in 1959, so...
Okay, you're only 7 years older than me, so I grew up in the 70s and 80s. My kind of formative two teenage years were very much sort of 1980 onwards.
But I think actually in many ways that era was even harder for boys because at least girls got the chance to be tomboys. If boys wanted to be, what am I going to call them, femboys or sissies, that's the word.
Sissies, what we would now call, a femboy, but, boys couldn't be sissy. Boys couldn't be girly. Yeah.
So even before you hit puberty, you didn't have that right, so to speak. But it must have been very difficult actually having the right to be tomboyish taken away from you.
It was, but I rebelled spectacularly, I think. And, I think I've always strived to just be me. And almost everybody, apart from my mother, was okay with that. But, when it's your primary caregiver telling you that who you are is bad or wrong, that goes deep.
And does it get more complicated when you start entering into sexual relationships if you're not going to conform to the gender stereotypes?
Yeah, because, until I moved out of the area, the people that I was socialising with, so the boys and the men that were in my pool of, potential romantic or sexual partners, had their own expectations of what a woman should be. And when I didn't present as that was either very off-putting or scary or perhaps, initially attractive. But I remember someone saying to me, probably when I was about 19, well, you're not the kind of girl that I could take home to mum.
Ooh, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I thought it was a bloody brilliant thing. I thought it was amazing. I was like, yes, I've made it. But yeah.
I remember around about that age seeing a badge that you could buy. You used to have badge shops in those days. Yeah, I don't know if you remember badge shops.
I remember the little pin badges, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. They had one saying, "We're the people that our parents warned us about."
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's wonderful.
I think you might have bought that badge. I didn't have the courage to buy it.
Yeah, I think I'm probably still wearing it. Yeah.
So give me an example of some of the unhelpful messages that you're helping your clients unpick.
I guess it very much depends on who they are and, the messages they got. So assuming I am working with a white person born in Europe or, North America with very kind of Eurocentric messaging. And I think age plays a factor, and generation plays a factor too. But the messaging is that, true love, man, woman, find the one for life, get on the relationship escalator, date, get engaged. Not necessarily now, but when I was growing up, get married, live together, have children. This is what you should do. And be attracted to the opposite gender. And then through my lifetime, as you say, we've moved on a lot in terms of, sexual orientation or sexuality, but we haven't moved, sadly we're going backwards, but we haven't moved very far in terms of gender gender expression, gender identity. We haven't moved very far in terms of sexual fluidity. We haven't moved very far in terms of how we express and how we enjoy pleasure. So kink, BDSM, or who we do that with, and if we want to do that with multiple people. Whereas if I'm working with people from a different culture, perhaps, where polyamory is maybe more the norm, or where different, perhaps indigenous gender expressions have been the norm. So it really depends on who someone is, their own childhood and life experiences, their generation, the messages they got, and what they have taken in from all of those influencing factors.
So why is it so important to understand the messages and understand where the meaning has come from?
Because often those messages are instilled in us from a very early age. They're part of our core conditioning before we even have the cognition to question or to challenge. You know, we are told what's right and what's wrong, usually by our caregivers or by school or by church, and we don't question that. And then when we do start to question that, if we start to question that, and then we're told it's wrong by the people who we believe have our best interests at heart, that, you know, seen as the kind of experts and those with, you know, the adults, really, the people that we look up to, then we grow up with the sense of, you know, what I think and feel is wrong.
So why is it so difficult to come out as bisexual, do you think?
I think there's a really interesting statistic. I'm just going to read it. So it was a survey by Stonewall in 2020, and it found that 20% of bisexual people are out to their families compared to 63% of gay and lesbian people.
Gosh.
And I think, yeah, it's the really stark difference, really stark. You know, a fifth of bisexual people feel they can come out. And I think there's a lot of that is to do with the stigma and phobia around bisexuality and some of the messaging that we get that it's greedy. You're greedy. Yeah, just haven't made up your mind. You just haven't found the right man, the right woman. Bisexual people are promiscuous. Bisexual people are going to cheat. So, yeah, lots of those reasons really that come out to me. And I think that we have moved, you know, and I say society in the broadest sense, become more accepting of lesbian, gay folk, but less so of bisexual people.
And sometimes it can be the lesbian and gay people who have the most problems with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we do see stigma, you know, within the LGBTQIA plus community too, towards bisexual people, just as we see that prejudice and that marginalisation towards transgender folk.
And do you think it's more acceptable for women to be bisexual than men, or do you think it's equally an issue?
I think what's interesting is that it's seen as, certainly in my experience and the research that I'm familiar with, that it is more acceptable for women. But then in saying that, for a lot of perhaps cisgender men, bisexual women are fetishised, are objectified.
And you also actually hear sometimes of lesbian women watching gay porn as well,
yeah.
Which I've never quite understood what the interest is.
I think that when it comes to what turns us on, a lot of it for me, I just think there's no rhyme or reason. It just turns us on. And we start to question it when we think it's wrong or we shouldn't, rather than accepting, well, actually, that does it for me. And I think another interesting factor around sort of bisexuality and sexual fluidity is that sexual orientation is much more likely to be stable than it is fluid, but women are more likely to experience sexual fluidity than men. And I'm talking about the gender binary here. I'm not talking about non-binary or trans folk.
Okay, let's just explain what you mean by sexual fluidity.
Okay, so being attracted to people of the same or other genders, and that attraction may change over time. It may change over time for multiple different factors. So it might depend on, you know, who's in our world at the time. So an example of that might be folks who are incarcerated, might never consider themselves to be bisexual, but may well, because of circumstance, be attracted to or have sex with people of the same gender. But they might not identify themselves as bisexual or gay or lesbian, but because of circumstance, because of environmental factors, that's the people that they are having sex with at that time. You could be, attracted primarily to one gender, but also experience attraction to another. And that may be fluid over time. It may be, who you socialize with. It may be influenced by your past or your present, or, your emotional connections. We may develop an emotional connection with someone of a gender that previously we weren't sexually attracted to. But the depth of that emotional attraction can flow into a sexual attraction.
But somehow this whole topic of fluidity and not sort of knowing, not having settled, somebody being settled, is sort of deeply worrying to us for some reason. Perhaps you can help us understand why that is, because I'm a very tolerant and open person, and I can feel an uncomfortableness growing in as you're saying, well, you could meet somebody and then suddenly you'll be disappearing off down another different rabbit hole. There's something unsettling about that thought. So help us understand it.
Okay. I'm not turning the tables here, but I'd be curious as to why that's unsettling for you.
To be honest, I don't really know. I think it's something sort of deep in my unconscious that I'll do my best to explain. You sort of want your partner to remain, and I know this is completely and utterly ludicrous, you want them to stay the same. It's a bit like, I like to live in one house. I don't really, I'm not a gypsy sort of kind of thing. I like that settledness. And so, the idea of being told I've got to give up my house and live in a caravan would be just horrible to me. And it sort of sounds like my partner's going to become a caravan rather than a house, if that makes any sense at all.
It makes perfect sense. I really like that. That's making me laugh because I am the complete opposite.
You're a caravan.
I'm a caravan. I'm a nomad. I'm a Cancerian. I carry my home on my back. And so why is it different? We don't like uncertainty. A lot of us don't like uncertainty. We find that uncomfortable. We like the security and the safety that comes with having that secure attachment to our person. And, sitting in uncertainty. So that, again, that's something else that I hear. If I'm working with someone, perhaps in a relationship, and they want to come out to their partner as being bisexual, they may fear that their partner will think they're going to leave them. But they're saying, actually, just because I experience attraction to a gender other than yours, it doesn't mean that I'm going to run off and leave you for someone else.
But we have a deep fear of that, don't we?
We do. We fear loss. Bisexual people, there's often an unconscious jealousy being played out in a partner because it's this fear of loss. Because if I've got you and me, I know what that is. But if you bring assertive, if you bring your attraction to another gender in, then that's threatening to me.
And it's not just a fear of loss. I think we all have a deep sense of a fear of being not enough. And certainly when it comes to sex, there's that fear that somebody else is going to have the golden tush or whatever else it is, and that they're going to take one taste of it, and my God, they're going to be gone because they've got the golden breasts or the golden penis or whatever it is. The golden apple. Let's just call it the golden apple.
The golden apple. But I think, if we think about jealousy in that way and the fear in that way, the fear that somebody else is going to be better than us, that someone else is going to fulfill my partner in a way that I can't, that's going to be so alluring for them and so pleasurable for them, they're going to want that more than they want me. But that also then affects our sense of self.
And do you think that we also have a fear that actually we might be caravans ourselves, that, we've been told that we've got to be one thing, and somehow if somebody close to us starts investigating it, that then suddenly it will become catching in some way, and we've got that fear that somehow inside we're not quite as settled as we think we are.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think what the kind of Shakespearean quote was, this thing of darkness I acknowledge mine. We project everything into the shadows, and if someone else is bringing that into the light for us and perhaps shining a light on things that we have suppressed, things that we have kept hidden, or as you say, they've not even been aware of, it could be really scary. Because that will unsettle our status quo. That will unsettle all we know to be familiar and safe.
So there's a sort of, I think this is more like a folk wisdom or not. I don't know. We're going to perhaps test it out. You're probably a better person qualified to answer this or not. There's a sort of folk wisdom that many of us are bisexual to some extent. And we've been just sort of pushed into this idea that we're only going to find one half of the population or the other half of the population attractive. What do you think of this folk wisdom?
I don't have a definitive response. I think there is a degree of truth in it. But I also think that for many people, they are only attracted to one gender. They are only attracted to one gender. And I think, in terms of, psychotherapy, Freud was one of the first people to say, actually, our libidinal drives, as he would have called it, are omnidirectional. They can go in different directions. So I wonder if that's where that folk tale originated. Do we all have the potential to be attracted to more than one gender? Yes, we probably do, if we could open our minds and our hearts and our bodies to it. But do we want to?
And what advice would you give to somebody who is listening to this and saying, somewhere deep inside, they're wondering if they might be bisexual, either from gay to bisexual or from heterosexual to bisexual?
I would just ask them to take some time to explore that, to think about it. There are so many variables in our sexual orientation, as we would have called it. And I think first up, I would normalise it and say, yeah, it's okay. It's perfectly natural to be curious and to consider whether you might be. And then to think about your life and kind of in which dimensions that sexuality might be rising in you. Could it be that you've made a close friendship with someone at work who is of a gender that you previously haven't been attracted to? And what is it about that person that is opening up these thoughts of sexual attraction? Or is it perhaps, a fantasy, something has piqued your interest that has started that process of reflection? So I think, I certainly wouldn't kind of close them down and say, no, you're just as you always have been. And, I'd invite them to step into that exploration with themselves and with me.
Do you think there comes different points in our lives where we're more likely to start this exploration?
Possibly. In my experience with the people that I work with, questioning has tended to be in the kind of the teenage, the earlier kind of years of sexual exploration. And then perhaps after, people have been on that relationship escalator and done the marriage and the kids thing, and then maybe you're starting then to think about, well, what about me? Did I just step onto that because I thought that that's what I had to do? There may be more to my life than that. I may want more things now.
So something like getting divorced can actually be a time. And I'm wondering if midlife, when you're sort of everything's up for discussion, is also a time as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when some of the kind of societal pressures are off and the relational pressures are off.
So tell us about gender fluidity and what that is and how it fits in with sexuality.
Okay. Well, gender and sexuality are two very distinct things.
So sexuality is who you're attracted to and what you like doing, yes?
Yeah, yes.
So tell me about gender fluidity.
Gender exists on a spectrum. Gender identities exist on a spectrum from, cisgender. So typically our genders are assigned to us at birth and usually based on what a doctor or a midwife can see. So based on your genitals, and then reinforced through kind of, socially constructed characteristics of man and woman, the binary. So having to adopt to those norms, those roles, those kind of relationships between men and women. But the reality is that the gender spectrum is very, very wide. So you've got cisgender.
What does cisgender mean?
The cisgender, that you identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. So I was assigned female at birth and I feel like I'm female.
So you would identify yourself as a cis woman, would you?
I'm a cis woman. I'm very much a cis woman. And then along the spectrum, you've got folks who are agender, don't identify with any particular gender.
But sorry to stop you.
Yeah.
So what if you are like, I think both of us, I identify as a man. I would be described as a cis man, but I don't follow any of the rules of being drinking beer, liking football and punching
Yes,
people in the pub car park. That's just so not me. I'm interested in the arts and all sorts of other things that are sort of not stereotypical male. So how does that work?
And I think, I would go back to where you learnt those things. That's what it means to be a man. But I think what you're talking about there is the expression of your gender. So you are male, you identify as being a man, but your gender expression, so the kind of things that you enjoy, your public gender, for you feel more aligned to what felt or feels to you like not very masculine traits.
Not sort of macho.
Not macho, yeah. So that's the expression of your gender, because you've got your identity and then you've got how you express that gender. So it may be through clothing. It may be through your mannerisms. Thinking about, one of the stereotypes that I grew up with, and probably you grew up with, girls wear pink, boys wear blue.
Yeah.
A very simple example of gender expression.
So it sounds like you're a gender expression rebel.
I guess. I'm cisgender. I am cisgender and I identify as being female. But I also am aware that I experience and I feel very masculine, traditionally, what would have been traditionally masculine. And so my gender expression could be as you see me today, presenting quite feminine.
Yeah, you've got nail varnish on, and have you got makeup as well?
A bit.
A little bit of makeup. Whereas I'm wearing no makeup and I have no nail varnish.
No nail varnish, yeah. But if you'd have seen me, this morning walking my dog, I had what would have been, when I was growing up, traditionally kind of masculine clothes, like baggy jeans, Doc Martens, beanie hat, check shirt. And I think that the expression of gender is very interesting, because so many of us are taught that we can't play with that. And what you said about, actually in the early years, perhaps we can play with that gender expression, but you still go into a toy store. You've got the girls and the boys' toys, the things that you should play with.
Yeah, you've got to have girls are going to be having a cooking set and boys are going to be having a DIY set. Yeah.
And so those beliefs around kind of norms and roles are instilled from a very, very young age.
So you have cisgendered, and then what else do you have?
So I would say, bigender, where somebody identifies, feels kind of a good balance of male and female. You have folks who are non-binary, who don't identify as male or female, or may at times identify as being male, female, or, agender, gender neutral. Actually, I don't have a gender. I'm just me. I'm just Di. I'm just Andrew. People who are gender fluid. So as we were talking about sexual fluidity, gender fluidity, shifting over time and with circumstance.
So if you're gender fluid, how's that going to affect your sexuality?
I think that they're quite distinct. I think that if we wanted to kind of label sexuality, so if I am gender fluid and I am embodying my masculine, I'm feeling and I'm presenting, experiencing myself as male at the moment, and I'm attracted to men, would I term myself as gay, or would I just say, that's who I'm attracted to right now? But we very much try to put people in boxes. So if you are this gender, then if you are male, you are attracted to men, you're gay. If you're attracted to women, you're heterosexual. And if you're attracted to both or all or other genders, you're bi. But we're very good at putting labels. And then obviously we've got transgender folk, and we've got, indigenous genders that have existed for millennia, like the Hijra and the Mushe in Mexico. So more indigenous genders. And, I move away from the term third gender, because that to me implies that we've got a first and second gender. But gender non-conforming folk have been around since the dawn of time.
So are labels helpful or not? I'm just sort of beginning to think that on one level, it might be helpful to be able to say I'm bisexual and to see, other bisexual folks on television, and for it to be a perfectly acceptable label to have. But then at the same time, it also might not be very useful, because you might be bisexual one day and then, 5 years later, you sort of suddenly become gay or you become straight. So labels, for or against?
It's a very personal thing. Like, labels in all their forms, it's what it means to the individual. Some people take a lot of comfort from, again, the certainty of saying, this is me and this is how I am right now. But for other people, they just want to be themselves, how they are, who they're with, how they express themselves. So I think, society wants to put people in boxes. We want to categorize, don't we? We want to give people their labels to make it easier for us to understand. So going back to kind of certainty again. But the label really is for the individual, whether it's useful to them or not.
So that's the definition. If it's helpful for you, grab it.
Yeah.
If it's not, then you don't have to have it pinned on you by somebody else. Is that your message?
So, yeah, I don't believe so, yeah.
So I'm thinking that probably one of the central things that you have to do in your work is help people deal with shame. Am I right about that?
Yeah, very much so.
So Tell me about shame and how we should deal with it, because I think when it comes to sex, shame is sort of knocking on the bedroom door all the time, or in fact, it's in bed with us.
Yeah, I think it's, understanding the source of the shame, where it originated from, and thinking about how we protect ourselves from that shame. So whether I'm trying to think of the person's name, Linda Hartling and Brené Brown shared some of Linda's stuff about, how we defend against shame. We kind of move away from that shame. As you say, with sexual shame, we often keep it hidden. That's a defense against shame. Or we may move towards that sense of shame and try to please others. And, if you think about sex, try to be a good lover, but give someone else the best experience that we can, so we don't have to think about ourselves and what we really like. And then we might move against that shame, where we kind of project that shame onto others for making them wrong, for feeling and wanting the things that we really want. So I think it's about unpacking that shame, where it came from, how we experience it, how we express it, and then turning kind of back inwards. And I think that it comes with a kind of self-acceptance and a pride in yourself, and looking at all of the positive things that you are, all the positive experiences that you have, the positive relationships that you have. And, I think the antidote to shame is that authentic pride. And it's supporting someone to move towards that, and that acceptance and pride in who they are.
So is it important to understand where in our bodies the shame actually is?
Yeah, absolutely. The embodiment of shame, because we might not cognitively know that. We might not be able to recognize that as shame. And I did a workshop last week. You mentioned the erotic playground, the coaching program that I run with my colleague Tiger Rose. And we did an exercise on the embodiment of shame. And almost everybody said that they felt shame in their gut, and it rose up into their throat, and they couldn't let it out. It was a deeply rooted gut feeling that rose in them.
So how do you help people get it out? Because I think having it either in your gut or your throat ain't very nice.
It's not. We talk about it. Again, talking about bringing the shadow into the light. We keep things hidden because we're ashamed. And as a therapist, it's providing that safe space for somebody to explore their depth, to explore the things that they've kept hidden, and to understand why.
So I think in a moment we'll find out more about that erotic playground and how you sort of discover your playground. And I've also got a letter that I think is going to help us move in this direction that's been sent in by one of our listeners. So in a moment we'll be talking about that.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Please follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material and other benefits.
My men's retreat runs from Sunday the 28th of September to Wednesday the 1st of October in the woods just outside Berlin, Germany. Step out of your daily stress. Take stock of where your life is going and deepen your relationship with yourself and other men. One of the reasons everyone feels more anxious is not just the fast-changing world, but how we've become more isolated. In particular, we are cut off from the wisdom and support of other men, mostly because we find it difficult to open up and be truly vulnerable with each other. In my 4-day workshop with a group of like-minded men, we can focus on what it means to be a man today and how we can support our sons to become balanced men. It will be a truly transformative experience, and I would like to share it with you. You can find out more about the beautiful location, the seminar house itself, and the costs on my website, andrewgmarshall.com. Click on the button Men's Retreat. Do it now because we've almost filled half the places.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, is telling everyone, let's face it in therapy. By talking or texting with a supportive, licensed therapist at Talkspace, you can face whatever is holding you back, whether it's mental health symptoms, relationship drama, past trauma, bad habits, or another challenge that you need support to work through. It's easy to sign up. Just go to Talkspace.com and you'll be paired with a provider, typically within 48 hours. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule. Plus, Talkspace is in-network with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. Make your mental health a priority and start today. If you're not covered by insurance, get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com and enter promo code SPACE80. That's SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com and enter promo code SPACE80.
If you'd like to participate in the program, it's very simple. Go to my website, new improved website, andrewgmarshall.com. And if you look for the podcast section and go in there, there's a place that you can participate in the program. And this is what this gentleman has done. I'm 40 years old and a respectable member of the community where I live. It's a small town. I'm married and I love my wife and we have a beautiful family together. However, I have discovered something about myself which is turning my life upside down. I was browsing the internet and came across a site with all these kinky things for sale. I saw the whips and for some reason I instantly got hard. I closed it down, put it out of my mind, but the thought came creeping back in. I looked again, and this time it was the hand and leg cuffs, instantly hard. I've tried to lock this door, but it keeps swinging open. I've tried to manage by looking at porn where men are tied down and flogged, but I have this huge desire to experience it in the flesh, so to speak. I know my wife would be shocked and probably horrified, and I can't see her wanting to open the door. I don't think I want to experience it with her anyway. I don't want to cheat or keep secrets. So I'm in turmoil. I have so much to lose, but I can't help myself.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And the kind of person that would perhaps explore psychosexual therapy to understand what's going on for them.
So what would they do in psychosexual therapy?
Well, I think firstly, what I would do is reassure him that there's nothing wrong with him, that we all find different things arousing, and, that those might be things that we've never even imagined ourselves doing, or things we might have thought wrong or bad, so the taboo. And I think that for many of us, once we lift the lid and expose those things that we've kept hidden, either consciously or unconsciously kept hidden, we can become preoccupied with the fantasy, of what it might be like to experience this taboo. But then there's a distinction between what is turning him on and the preoccupation that's starting to affect his life. He's watching porn, he's scared about and thinking about it a lot. He's scared to bring it, into his relationship with his wife. He doesn't want to cheat. So it's obviously starting to occupy a lot of his thoughts. And I would just say, what is it distracting him from? So I'd kind of look to work in two ways. One, looking at his arousal, what he is finding arousing and why, and what he might want to do with that. And I'd also look at the impact of this preoccupation, how it's invading, his thoughts and perhaps his relationship, and if it's becoming compulsive. So I'd look at two distinct areas. And I think if I start with him rather than the preoccupation, there's so much we don't know. It sounds as if his arousal when thinking about restraint and pain is something new for him. But I'd be keen to know about his early sexual thoughts and feelings. And as we talked about earlier, the messages he got about sex growing up. I'd also be keen to know about his relationship with his wife, not just their sex life, but how well they communicate, how open they are with each other, why he thinks she'd be shocked and probably horrified. Certainly wouldn't encourage him to tell her straight away, rather take time with him to understand what's going on for him, whether it is actually something he'd like to experience in real life, and if so, how might that be possible within his marriage? Because I'm assuming that they're monogamous.
Well, they've not said anything
They've not said anything else, so I'm assuming they are.
And the way he's talking about, I don't want to cheat or keep secrets.
Exactly. Yeah.
Suggests it, but...
It does suggest it. And I'd also explore with him the difference between fantasy and reality.
So tell me about that. What's the difference between fantasy and reality? Beyond the obvious.
Yeah. I would say that just because the idea of something turns us on, it doesn't mean we have to experience it in the flesh or we'd even enjoy it. But I think about, what's driving his fantasy, his arousal at the thought of restraint and pain. What is it? What's going on there? Is it distracting him from something? He says he stumbled across it on the internet.
I must admit, I wonder how you stumble across these. How you
stumble? It's not something that I often see popping up in my ads when I'm in Google. Or actually, no, maybe I do, but it's not what most of us, have pop up in our Google ads. But I would just think, what sent him off? Peeking into that rabbit hole. What's it distracting him from? What piqued his interest? Is it something he would really like to even, try and experience, or to understand, stepping into kind of his arousal pattern? What's it doing for him? What is it about it that's triggering? Is it about actually, I just want to be taken, someone to take control for me. I'd want to, someone to tie me up and just do things to me rather than me have to do anything. Or is it just the thought of pain? Is that quite a bit enticing? He may have, watched a film or, something where they see people experiencing pleasure in pain and he's curious about that. Or maybe he'd experienced pain and found it strangely pleasurable.
I think what's interesting is that our natural reaction when we see this is to immediately start thinking about what he could do. So we're very much moving towards action. But what you're saying is really we need to be curious and understand and really drill down deep into this. And the action part, throw that 6 months, 9 months down the road of actually exploring and understanding what this is about.
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew, because I think that compulsion, that preoccupation can drive us to act without thinking. We might feel that I just have to do something about this. So I would, encourage him to look at how he kind of regulates his emotions and manages those impulses and take the time to truly understand himself. Because once he does it, say he does decide to go and explore this outside of his marriage, he can't undo that. He has taken something that is troubling and he may think might shock his wife. If he acts on it, he may be bringing something that would devastate his wife, might destroy his marriage. So it's taking the time to reflect on that. And I think curiosity, sorry, Andrew, go on.
I was going to say this. I think there's a huge difference about your partner coming and saying, look, I've having these thoughts. I've spent 9 months working on them with a therapist. And this is what I've thought about, and you've had help and coaching for this, and then being discovered having done something that is cheating. I mean, the conversation is going to be entirely different, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And if he does get to the point where he wants to share his desires with his wife, then they might benefit from relationship therapy, the support of a relationship therapist who is kink aware and can facilitate, what are very tricky conversations and manage, learn how to manage those emotional reactions. Because you mentioned curiosity, and that's something I always invite, I'll say couples when I'm working with just two partners, to be curious, to not necessarily, it's very hard to suspend our judgment. So he thinks his wife is going to judge him, is going to think he's bad, is going to punish him, is, maybe even going to end their relationship. But I would invite her to try and be curious, to understand him before just rejecting him.
And understand her own reactions, because
Exactly.
Because she's also going to have all the messages that she that she might actually not be particularly happy with herself. That the sort of good girls have to be good all the time, sort of kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
They have to be respectable members of the community, which I have to say is, having moved to Berlin, it's very difficult to remain respectable.
I do wonder if I should live in Berlin.
Well, there's a huge difference between, I used to live in a little village in Sussex and living in a big city, in a city that's known for sort of anything goes. And maybe offline, I will tell you about some of the things that go on in the clubs in Berlin. And it's, as a country boy, it's sort of rather difficult to believe they do, but they do.
I know they do. I have visited Berlin.
Oh, right. So you'll probably, in the conversation afterwards, you can tell me what I haven't, where I haven't been.
And I'm the opposite now. I live in a tiny village.
So tell me about the erotic playground. How does that work? And is this something that somebody like this, who is becoming very curious about something, that would be helpful for them? Or would it be like pouring petrol onto a flame?
I think it would be very helpful. And the erotic playground isn't just for individuals. The program that we're running at the moment, we're in the middle of, is for a mix of individuals and people, with partners. But it was an idea that came to me and my colleague Tiger Rose in a session. We're both sex and relationship therapists. And we just thought, what if people don't want to spend, months and months in therapy? What if they just want to experience fun and creativity and meaningful connections beyond these traditional ideas of sex and intimacy? How might they do that without going too deep? And our motivation for creating the erotic playground is everything that you and I have been talking about today. We know how hard it is to talk about sensuality, sex, kink, fantasies. And, too many of us have had our yums yucked by somebody. And, that's one of my favourite sayings, really, is, don't yuck my yum. I might find something really, really yummy and you might find it really, really yucky. But,
it's a bit like Marmite. Some people like it, some people don't like it. And,
exactly.
But yet we don't cast non-Marmite eaters into the wilderness, or the Marmite eaters into the wilderness.
Exactly. Damn them to hell. Yeah, absolutely. But because of all the things you and I have been talking about, we've become cautious and, about who we share ourselves with. And what we want to do is to replace that frustration and caution with passion and playfulness. And that's why we very much wanted it to be a playground, and we wanted it to be beyond sex, because eroticism is beyond sex. It's about, sensuality. It's about things that we find pleasurable, but not necessarily sexually pleasurable, or that we might just, find pleasurable in a fun, playful kind of way.
Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, one example, and I'm probably giving something away. No, actually, this will go out after we've given the homework to our current participants, is the concept of the kinky kitchen.
Right.
So, people say, where do I start? How do I know? What does it feel like to be spanked or to be hit with something or to be tied up? And we just say, go into your kitchen cupboards, go into your cabinet. Find out what you've got. See what you can play with. Do you have a spatula that you could spank your partner on?
Please don't put your bits in the blender, is all I can say.
No. Yeah. Some people might get off on that, but very few. But it's just play around. Have some fun. It's not we don't just start with the fun stuff. We do invest some time in kind of exploring and unearthing potential and challenging people beyond sort of those limiting beliefs, as we talked about earlier. Shame, what might be holding them back? But it's allowing people to fantasize, to let their imaginations run wild, to in terms of play, bring their toys. I must say the erotic playground is very much a fully clothed coaching program. There's no nudity, there's no touch, but it's like, we're working online and we invite people to say, bring your favourite sex toy on and show it to us on screen. Don't use it, but show it to us on screen. Let us get to know, your toys and the things that you like to play with, which might kind of pique our interest in the kind of things that we might like to play with.
So I think that we could continue this conversation for a very long time, and we are in the bonus section going to be talking about the importance of sexual fantasy. So if you'd like to know about that, that's coming up in a moment. But before we finish the main program, I need to ask you, Diane, as a witness on The Meaningful Life, what makes your life meaningful?
Well, it's really interesting that you shared about moving from a small Sussex village to Berlin, because when I was reflecting on what has made my life meaningful recently, and I'm recently in the last few months, I've been a nomad my whole adult life, and I've always craved new experiences, new people, new places. And I moved to my Dorset village about 3.5 years ago. And last summer I started to get itchy feet. And the pull of change was drawing me kind of closer to the sea to find a new community. But I couldn't sell my house quickly enough to buy the new house that I'd set my heart on.
Oh dear.
So I decided to take time out of the whole process and just listen to what life was telling me. And what I heard was, stay where you are, settle into your community, into what you have and the home that you've created, a home I've lovingly created. And it's only the second home, I think I can say, in 58 years that I felt truly at home in a place where I feel safe and at peace. And so that's what I've done. I've chosen to stay, to embrace my lovely village. And that's made my life more meaningful because I've been reminded of the importance of appreciating what and who I have in my life.
So we've been going in opposite directions. I've become a bit more nomad-y and you've become a bit more settled. We need to balance ourselves out sometimes, really, don't we?
We do. And I think I was ready for that. And I'm not saying it's forever, but it's where I feel at home and at peace now. And that doesn't mean that I don't, hot-foot it up to London to have a different kind of fun. It doesn't mean that I don't travel and see friends in different places, but I love being settled and at home in my community.
So if you want to hear the bonus material, you can subscribe directly via Apple or Spotify. And if you want to become a supporter of The Meaningful Life and unlock the bonus material this way, here are the details.
You've been listening to The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. You can follow Andrew on Twitter, like him on Facebook, and please leave a review wherever you consume your podcasts. Making, editing, and distributing The Meaningful Life comes with substantial costs, and we'd like to ask for your help. Visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material for every program, send in a letter to be discussed by Andrew and his guests, and join a community of other people seeking to make their life meaningful. At the gold level, you get even more benefits. Production of The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall is by Michael Dooney. Social media by Madeleine Healy. Sound engineering and theme tune by Sebastian de la Luz Mendoza. And I'm Susie Colick. Please tell your friends and spread the word. Thank you.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, is telling everyone, let's face it in therapy. By talking or texting with a supportive, licensed therapist at Talkspace, you can face whatever is holding you back, whether it's mental health symptoms, relationship drama, past trauma, bad habits, or another challenge that you need support to work through. It's easy to sign up. Just go to Talkspace.com and you'll be paired with a provider, typically within 48 hours. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule. Plus, Talkspace is in-network with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. Make your mental health a priority and start today. If you're not covered by insurance, get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com and enter promo code SPACE80. That's SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com and enter promo code SPACE80.